Statistics show in like more and more recent studies, like the effects that screen time, smartphones, all of those things, they're having a major impact on young people. Well, hey, welcome back to Train Them Up podcast. This is episode 3. My name is Makaila Redden, and I'm a youth pastor.
And I'm Jenelle Woods, and I am a children's pastor. And today on the podcast, we've got some guests.
Yeah, so we obviously know who you ladies are, but why don't you tell everyone else who you are?
I am Makaila, and I'm Calvin's wife. We have 3 beautiful children, and I'm happy to be here.
And I am Jenelle Woods, and I am Zach's wife, and we also have 3 beautiful children.
High five.
Are you happy to be here?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us for episode 3 of this podcast. The premise for the podcast today is, I think it's something that really needs to be talked about in our time. I feel like it's just something that kind of goes under the radar and people just accept it as normal, but I feel like it's something that we really need to talk about. And so before I get there, I wanted to tell a quick story. If any of you who are joining us have ever grown up in church, or you went to Sunday school growing up, as it used to be called, in Sunday school, they used to do like cute Bible lessons, and they would sing these songs that they're really like those songs that get stuck in your head, and now you'll just be like randomly washing dishes or going about your day to day, and then it'll just like pop up into your head. And one of those songs specifically is "Be Careful Little Eyes What You See," and it was like, "Be careful little eyes what you see, be careful little eyes what you see," and it's like one of those things that is just like you'll just start humming the tune. You're like, why am I singing that? And I think it was purposeful. I think those songs are so catchy for the purpose of it's supposed to be stuck in your head and stuck in your heart. So you're reminding yourself of those things. And as cheesy as that song seems now, it was written in the early 80s probably, or I don't even know, maybe it's before that, but I think it got popular in the early 80s. And when you think about those lyrics, "Be careful little eyes what you see," I think that is actually a very important biblical concept that we should be reminding ourselves of as adults, but also for our kids, right? And it comes actually straight from the Bible in Psalms 101 verse 3. Wanted to read this real quick. David, the king, we obviously know he had some failures and some mess ups, but he still loved the Lord, and it was his desire to always do what was right. And in Psalms 101, he says this. He says, "I will set nothing wicked before my eyes. I will set nothing wicked before my eyes, for I hate the works of those who fall away. Those things shall not cling to me." And I think it's important, the fact that he says, "I will set nothing wicked before my eyes." But I think in our day and age, it's becoming more and more rampant, where just wickedness is all around us, and it's kind of hard to shelter our kids. It's hard to not let them see wickedness, I should say. So that's really the premise for our conversation today.
Yeah, I know, especially with our kids, you know, they're exposed to simple things like kids' YouTube, right? Like those are things that I don't think they're evil, but there can be some things on there that I don't want my kids to see. So those are things that we need to be looking out for. I mean, and if it's older kids, it's TikTok, it's Instagram, it's all these things. Like maybe those things themselves aren't evil, but things on there, I wouldn't want my daughter to see, my son to see. So
I think that you bring up a good point about how it's not necessarily evil, but it's not what you want your kids to see. I think there's a lot in the world that would even be maybe okay to see, like a cartoon, for example. There are cartoons that we let our kids watch or have let our kids watch that isn't necessarily bad, and it's not necessarily teaching them anything bad. But I've noticed the behavior differences in my kids after watching those things, and I've realized that it might not be bad, but it's not teaching them godly principles or teaching them how to behave in a way that Christ would be, happy to see, or that we as parents would be happy to see. So it's even guarding them from those things that don't look bad and may not be bad, but they're not encouraging the right things.
Jesus said, he talked a lot about the eye, and he said, if your eye is good, there will be light within you, but if your eye is bad, you'll be full of darkness. And the eyes play a big role in what happens within the heart and the soul. And if our eyes are constantly being filled with, like you said, not inherently wickedness, but just not light, it's not the light of the Lord, it's not the light of God, it's just going to become more dim and dim and dim. And then eventually, like, the heart will be filled with darkness. And again, it's the same for us as adults, but even more so, there's the tenderness of a child's heart. What they see at an earlier age starts to mold them. And statistics show in like more and more recent studies, like the effects that screen time, smartphones, devices, TV, all of those things, they're having a major impact on young people. And it used to be a funny phrase, like maybe for our parents, maybe your parents said it, maybe your parents said it. I know my parents definitely joked around, but they're like, if you stare at the screen too long, your eyes will go square. By the way, TVs used to be square. Now they're rectangular. But they used to say your eyes will go square. And obviously they were saying that to just warn us, like, it's going to hurt your eyes. But we're finding more and more, just even like worldly institutions, they're finding that there's so many physical and mental implications when we have too much screen time. And they were saying that, like, from the age 2 and under, like 75% of kids have used a smartphone for the first time or have a smartphone. Like 2-year-olds have a smartphone. That's wild. Like, we didn't even know iPhones didn't exist till we were all teenagers, and now 2-year-olds have smartphones. Over 50% of kids in our nation have TVs in their own bedrooms. Our kids have a TV in our bedroom because we suck. No. But,
Ours do too.
Called out.
and we're moving it today.
Yeah, today.
But, and it just, the stats keep just rising and rising. And when all of this stuff started to develop, we thought it was like a good thing. Like, parents were like, sweet, like we can teach them leapfrog way easier. They can have smartphones and all this stuff. And there's not even enough research to just show how much damage there is to a young person. And some of the things that it affects is like maybe not making our eyes square, but it's making people socially square, like stuck in a box. They can't even hold proper conversations. Conversations with teens nowadays consist of emojis, memes, and one-word sentences. Like, you won't hear a longer conversation with a group of teens. It either is gossip or it's just one-word sentences. And it's becoming more and more difficult for young people to hold those real conversations, deep, meaningful conversations with people, because they're just constantly uploaded with so much input from their devices. And so, yeah, it's just crazy that it wasn't normal for us, but it's the new normal for kids growing up. Like, there's an old Batman phrase where Bane, is it Bane? He said, "Batman, you adapted to the darkness. I was born in it." And that's true. Like, we've adapted to these things. We've adapted to these in our lives. Like, now email is on here, texts are on here, phone calls are on here, schedules are on here, planning apps are on here, our bank is on here, everything is on here. And we've adapted to how to use these, but our kids are being brought up in these. So
yeah, I think what we're trying to get at is we need to be careful. So Ephesians chapter 5 verse 15 says, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but wise.
do you guys think, and either Jenelle or Makaila, do you think that it is an easy temptation for parents to, as an escape, maybe it's just a chaotic day, you're just really stressed out, you're tired, do you think it's an easy temptation for parents to just put their kids in front of a screen so that you can have some rest? And we're asking you ladies, because
Yes.
you spend most time with our kids than we probably do, because we're at work most of the day and we come home. So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think it is. So we came about parenthood a different way than most. We fostered our children first before they were adopted, and a lot of our parenting has had to be retroactive, I'd say. They were exposed to a lot of things that even adults shouldn't be exposed to. So even how they interact with their iPads and YouTube, like, we let them, but everything has to be intentional. It has to be, whether it's we sit there with them and watch it, or just monitoring what is going into their mind, just because we're kind of trying to backpedal, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like the word you used, retroactive. And it's a good point, because like you said, you guys came into parenting like a different way than probably most people. And I think there's a lot of parents hopefully joining our podcast in the same shoes you guys are in, whether it be foster care or it be grandparents that are looking after their grandkids because for whatever reason, parents aren't in their life. And a lot of people are having to kind of undo what the world has taught them or undo what the enemy has already instilled in them.
Or even parents that got saved later into their children's lives. I always have a soft spot for people like that because you've done things that you wish you could go back and change, but you can't. But it's not irreversible, I guess is what I'd say.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like I see that a lot in youth ministry where there are teens that come that have that exact situation at home. Their parents weren't saved and they might even just been people living together. Then they got saved. They're married now, but they had been raising their kid one way, like the world had been showing them. And now it's like their parents have made that decision to follow Christ and they've been baptized and they're growing in their faith, but now their kid is, or their teen is still living in the world. And it's like that big, massive struggle. And yeah, it's a good point to make.
I know it's a temptation for me to do that as well. With the 3 kids at home, it can get, I'm sure, as you know, very exhausting and tiring throughout the day. And there are times when you just want to sit. You just want to think and have a few minutes just to be to yourself. Or you need to actually cook dinner or do something for the house that is important, like laundry. It's a lot easier to do that when you don't have little kids running around screaming at you or asking you for food or asking you for this or that. And so it is a temptation to just be like, here, let the TV like babysit you for just 1 hour. And
I think society's changed too, because I've heard my dad tell stories, and even when we were little, we were sent outside at 4.
Yes.
And nowadays it's kind of frowned upon to let your 4-year-old play in the woods by themselves. You know what I mean? Like, so I feel like we're in this weird position where we can't really send them out by themselves, but we have to try to find a way for them to entertain themselves. So I think it's just natural that we're like, well, here's a TV kind of thing.
No, you're right. There used to be, especially in like neighborhoods, there used to be the neighborhood teenager or the neighborhood, older kid who would watch the younger kids and you would play with them and everybody knew it was safe and fine. And then you'd come home and that doesn't happen anymore.
And that's how it is when like our niece comes over. She's 11, right? And that's the time where it's like, okay, we don't need these devices. We don't need TVs. We don't need iPads and stuff. Like our niece will take them and go outside and play with them. And it's like, oh, this is great. You know what I mean? This is the way it's supposed to be, right? So I guess next question is the inverse. So are there times where you feel tempted to just be stuck in your phone with all the apps and everything, or just as something in the background or something, instead of having those intentional times with your kids?
Yeah, definitely. I've noticed that for my kids as well, that they tend to model what I'm doing. So if I'm sitting on my phone the whole time, I'll even be asked sometimes by Everest, and he'll ask me like, well, can I watch TV? Can I watch a show? You're on your phone. And that is so convicting to me when he does that. And I throw the thing and I'm like, I'm done. I'm sorry. But they'll model what I'm doing. So if I'm sitting reading a book, how many times has he come over with a book and started reading because that's what I'm doing? And so I've just noticed that because it is easy for me to I just want to zone out sometimes and just see what other people are doing. Or sometimes I just want to see what other people are doing for homeschooling or food or other things that I want ideas for. So it's not bad. I'm not zoning out, ignoring them. I'm looking for certain things, but to them, they don't know that. They still see me on my phone.
I saw this video skit, whatever you want to call it, one time, and it really hit me in the heart, where the whole video was a mom on her phone, and I'm not saying mom because of you guys, but the video was a mom, and she's like, the whole thing, like she was on her phone, whatever she was scrolling through social media, and the whole time there's a kid like tugging on her arm saying like, mommy play, and she's like, not right now sweetie, not right now sweetie. And it changes scenes, and now the mom's like in another room and the kid's like, mommy play, and she's like, not right now sweetie, not right now sweetie. And then the song changes and it clearly flashes forward in time, and the mom's like, going up to the kid now saying like, hey, let's go hang out. And the kid's like, not right now, mom. Not right now, mom. And it's like, it was really convicting, because it's like, sometimes we just want to be like, not right now, not right now, not right now. But it's like, I think that verse you read, it goes on to say like, redeem the time because it's short. And the time we have with our kids is so short. And in our modern era of smartphone devices, how devastating would it be if our kids are brought up with us paying more attention to our phones than them? And then one day we're like, why doesn't our kid want time with us? And it's like, well, did we spend so much time on our phones that they're like, dad cares more about his phone than he does me? And we obviously in our heart would think that's not true, but what do they see from us? And
Yeah, I also know too, my attitude and patience level, if I'm on my phone, is like nothing. And it's the same way with the kids. If they're on their device a lot, their threshold for patience and everything is so low. But it's the same thing, I think, with parents as well. We're like, it just takes a little bit to be like, what are you doing? And you're just flying off the handle sometimes I'll be like, why am I doing this? And I'm like, oh, I haven't been present with them. So it's hard for me to be patient and kind with them.
Yeah, I've definitely heard it said, and I believe that this is true, that the enemy's biggest tactic right now for us is distraction. I think that distraction is the word for our world right now. And I can find myself caught up in distraction. And what more would he like to see us distracted from than our kids and the next generation? If we're constantly focusing on something else, we're not training them the way that we should be. And we are more prone to walking in, low tolerance, low patience, when we should be walking in the fruit of the Spirit. But we're not going to be walking in that if we're not focusing on that, or we're not trying to build those characteristics.
The devil won't make you bad. He'll make you busy.
Yeah, the devil won't make you bad, he'll make you busy. And
like
that's, again, true for us as parents and kids. You had mentioned to me earlier when we were talking a proverb.
Yeah, it was, a child left to his own brings disgrace to his mother. And it was speaking specifically in the context of discipline, and how really what I got from it was that it's our job to be disciplining, or discipling, I should say, training our children. But how often do we leave our children to devices or to TV, and we joke that TV is our babysitter, but that's just them raising themselves at that point. We're leaving them to their own. I'm not saying that doing it one time is that, but just that consistent behavior, I guess, of leaving them in front of the TV like that really is letting them raise themselves.
Right. I think we a lot of times try to have passive discipleship, and it's not going to happen. Like, the kids are going to be discipled by something. It's either going to be the world, which honestly a lot of times is much better at it. They're more intentional at it than a lot of times I am, at least. And
so true.
I think with my biggest thing I've been trying to work on is just intentional about everything that we do with our kids, because like you said, it's short. Like, we have a very short amount of time with them. And if we're not being intentional, then what's filling that time?
On the lines of being careful, little eyes, it's easy for us to tell our kids to be careful, but we got to be showing that we got to be showing them what that means in our life as well. Like, are we exemplifying for them what it means to be careful, what we look at? Because if we're just allowing them to look at everything and expose them to everything, when they're old enough to be on their own, it's like, what did we teach them? Are they just being like, well, it's fine. Like, what goes into my eyes isn't affecting me. Like, I can watch horror, gore, and like demonic stuff because it's not really affecting me. But it's like, we know as Christians that stuff does, like, what goes into our eyes does affect us internally. And so we need to be showing them, are we being careful what we are looking at?
Yeah, Cal, that's a great point. I think there's two trains of thought, or two extremes, if you will. Like, there are parents that are like, I'm never gonna let my kids be exposed to anything at the fear that they'll never come to Christ. And then they grow up, and then they turn 18, they leave the house, and then it's just like the world is like overloading them, and then they stray. Or there's the other extreme where it's like, I'm just gonna let my kid do what they want to do, and then hopefully they'll come to Christ. I'm just gonna let them be of the world, and then they'll see me and how I love Jesus, and then they'll come to Christ. So I guess my question is how do we strike a balance between those two things? How do we strike a balance between sheltering and just completely leaving our kids exposed to the world?
So I think the most important thing is having an open conversation with your kids. And one thing I really appreciated about my parents growing up is I feel like we didn't have a rule unless we had a reason why. Like, it wasn't just don't watch TV because it's bad. It was whatever rule it was this is why, and this is why God tells us not to do it. So I think sometimes parents react so they get almost crazed, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you were watching that. And the kid's kind of like, okay, it makes them think about it and like sensationalize it in their mind. Like, what could be so bad about this? I want to go find out more. A good example is our daughter was watching a show on Disney Plus. It's called Walk the Prank. And it's actually a really funny show. It's kind of like
Punked, but for kids.
Yeah, punked for kids. And they like do pranks on adults in their lives and stuff, especially like their babysitters and stuff. And I was watching this with Serenity. I was in the room, and all of a sudden I start hearing they were talking about they were doing like a seance with a Ouija board, and they were going to pretend to be the spirit that came out. And I was like, turn it off. And I started freaking out, and she was looking at me like, what is going on? And I was like, Zach was there too. And I was like, come here. And I was like telling you about it. And then I was like, okay, we need to calm down. And we like discussed it. And then we brought her back in the room, and we were like, this is why it's wrong. Like, we don't believe that spirits just hang out, and like when you die, you just hang out. And we actually got a lot of fruitful conversation about it because we were able to talk about what happens when we die. Where does our spirit go? Where does, like the reasons why we don't think this is funny. It's actually serious.
Right. So in a situation where we're like knee jerk, like, and probably rightfully so, like, no, came some fruit from that, So
I think from my life, I was probably on the end of, I know it's hard to find a balance, but I think I was more so on the end of where my parents were more more protective of me. And it was that kind of thing. Like, they would, if something bad came up on the TV, they would just jump up and turn the TV off before like remotes existed. No, I'm just kidding. Honestly though, I did grow up with like a TV with just buttons on the TV, no remote. So when I was like really young, it used to be like jump up and jump in front of the TV and turn it off kind of thing. And I feel like sometimes there was no explanation other than it's bad and I'm not allowed to see that. And for me and my personality type, it was like, but now I want to see it. I feel like most kids are that way. Not all kids. All kids are kind of like, all right, mom said it's bad, so I'm not going to look at it. For me, it was the other way. I was like, well, now I want to go look at what I'm not allowed to look at. And yeah, I think it is good to have that balance of not just saying it's bad, but explaining to them why.
And to us, it was important because we have that conversation. She's 5, so it's not like I wanted to talk about Ouija boards with her at 5, but it did open up a conversation. So anytime someone says a spirit of any sort, she's like, Mom, is that a bad spirit? Like, what is that? And she'll ask me about it, so that now when she's 14 and someone has a Ouija board and she is in that situation, she can think back to, oh, this isn't funny. This is a serious thing that I shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, that was like the first thing that came to my mind when you said that, because we can't always control as much as we want to. We cannot always control what they're going to see at somebody else's house, maybe if they're at a friend's house or a grandparent's house. Well-meaning, they might be exposed to something that we wouldn't expose them to at our house. And so if we have that line of communication open with them, they can bring that to us and be like, hey, I was at so-and-so's house and we watched this show. This is what was on it. And I know the last time that something like this came up, we talked about it. Like, what is this? Is this okay? And I think that even at such a young age, they can make those connections and they can understand that they can come to us if we have that line open. But like you said, if it's always this knee-jerk reaction of turn it off with no explanation why, then they're not going to have any trust in us that they can come to us and that they won't get in trouble or that, we won't explain it.
This morning, actually, I was talking to my son and I realized I had never fully told him my testimony and my story. And when I got into it, I didn't give him all the details of my life because there are some things that he wouldn't understand yet because he's only 4 years old. But I did tell him Dada wasn't always a good guy. Dada used to be a bad guy. And that was the best words I could use for him and his understanding. He was like, you are a bad guy? was like, yeah, but God turned my life around and made me a good guy. And I think those things too, as well, of like what our kids are being exposed to, they should know the things we've endured and the things we've been exposed to a certain extent once they're old enough to
Age appropriately.
Yeah, age appropriate. But we should be honest with them, because I feel like that's another thing for a lot of parents, like a lot of parents that have messed up in the past that maybe now they're saved or they just did a lot of bad stuff. They won't tell their kids those things. And then if their kids find out one day, I think that's worse, because they'll be like, what? My mom's been telling me not to do this my whole life, and now I found out she used to do it. Like, I feel like that's worse. I think we should be honest with our kids. Like, we used to do those things, and when we were young, those things were fun for a moment, but they destroyed our life. And, and it's the same thing with what we look at. Like, it used to be fun for a moment because that's what sin does. It's pleasurable, but it doesn't satisfy.
And it takes a mystery out of it. Like, I've done this before, and I can tell you this is how it turns out, so that they have that roadmap of, okay, this is why I don't want to do that.
They have so much more exposure to things now than we ever did. And so for us to say, like, we've been through this, I mean, they're going to be inundated with this stuff constantly, no matter how much we try to stop them. At some point in their life, they're going to be exposed to things we don't want them to be. But if they have that, understanding that we've been through it before. Yeah.
So as we just close here, kind of got one more just maybe question, conversational topic, but we obviously live in modern day age. We can't really escape the world necessarily until we die or Lord returns and the creek rises. So we are in this world. We're in the year 2022, and we will continue on. So we live in a futuristic age. So devices are always going to be there, smartphones, iPads, TVs, and all that stuff. How can we utilize what the enemy uses for evil and turn it for good? Like, what are some ways as parents that we can be like, all right, we know that our kids are going to have smartphones. How can we use them for God's glory? We know they're going to have iPads. How can we use it for God's glory? Maybe there's some parents that don't know. Maybe they're struggling. Like, how do I get my kid to look at good things and not bad things?
I think there's a lot of healthy swaps you can do. I was talking to Zach the other day about our older kids were obsessed with Cocomelon. And there's nothing wrong with Cocomelon.
There's a lot wrong with Cocomelon.
Other than him being obnoxious. But we had it on almost like as ambient noise that the kids just dance to. And it's fine. They were happy and they were dancing. But we have another little guy now. And I was talking about, why aren't we playing something meaningful? Like, if these songs are going to be stuck in our head, why don't we
play
have
something that's going to point them to Christ?
Right. So we've been using Listener Kids. It's a lot like Coco. It's dancing, but it's Christian songs that get stuck in your head.
And then Right Now Media is a thing that we use actually a lot in our house. Our kids watch.
We'll put the link in the description.
But yeah, we use that a lot in our house as an alternative.
What is Right Now Media?
Right Now Media. How do you describe Right Now Media? I just use the kids section. I'm terrible.
It's like Netflix for a church.
Yeah, kind of like that. Also, there's stuff for parents there. Like, there's a lot of devotionals for adults on parenting and a variety of topics, but then there's also a kids section that's like, they've got Veggie Tales on there and, a bunch of different, faith-based children's shows that you might rival Paw Patrol or PJ Masks or.
We've shared this phrase, I think, in our first episode of this podcast, just the concept like kids are sponges and they absorb what they hear. But when we're talking about the eyes, they absorb what they see and they start acting out what they see. And our kids, we noticed that too. Like, our kids love superheroes. Like, what boys don't? We start to notice like they love it. They pretend and it's really fun. But we notice when we have Right Now Media turned on, there's this show that it's called The Bible Adventurers or something like that. I don't know. What is it?
I think it's Friends and Heroes.
Friends and Heroes. It's about Christians that were persecuted. And some of the scenes, like in this cartoon, the Christians are like in jail and they're in prison and they've got chains around their ankles. And Makaila and I were in the kitchen. We were getting dinner ready and we heard them like pretending, our boys were pretending they were in prison. And they're like, what do we do? What do we do? And then Everest goes, Justice, God will help us. And then Justice goes, help, God. Help, God. And so like for the rest of the night, Justice went around pretending like he was in chains going, help, God, help, God. And like I said, they're sponges, and Right Now Media is a great place where they can watch really good Christian cartoons that are just as fun as some of these other cartoons, but they're learning things about faith, courage, the Bible, scripture, and a lot of good things Well, I wish we could obviously keep having this conversation. We could keep going for 2 hours if we wanted to. And I hope we continue it at home. We hope all of you continue this conversation at home. But until then, we hope you guys will join us for next week of Train Them Up podcasts. Grace and peace. Peace and grace.